Kesubos Daf begins with a number of Agadata statements related to the Gemara we learned before. So we've seen before that in the times of Elisha there was a famine, and somebody came and brought a gift to Elisha of barley bread and kernels in their husks. So the Gemara quotes an incident that happened in the years of Rav Yosef. The Gemara says there was anger from HaKadosh Baruch Hu against Klal Yisrael, and there was a famine in the land. And the Rabbanan came to Rav Yosef and said, "Can you please be mispal for us?" And he said, "I'm not going to be mispal, because you see that Elisha had a famine in his days, and he was not mispal." Now, how much of a famine did he have in his days? So much that after everybody left the yeshiva, there was left over with him 2,200 people that he needed to feed because they didn't have any food on their own. That's how severe the famine was then. And he wasn't mispal, so therefore I'm not going to be mispal as well. And then the Rishonim discuss what was the reason that he and Elisha were not mispal in these situations. Now, says the Gemara, how do we know that there were 2,200 people left over? So we saw in the previous Gemara that the amount of food that they had was defined as lechem bikurim esrim lechem saorim v'charmel b'tziklono. So the 20 loaves is esrim lechem. Then it says lechem bikurim, that's the 21st one, and then it says v'karmel v'chad karmel, that's 22. So there were 22 loaves. And how much did each one feed? So we have a pasuk there that says v'ish Bami Baal Shlish V'Yavi Lisha Lekim Lechem Bikur Mesem Lechem Sarim Mekarmel B'Tziklono V'Yomer Etein La'am V'Yechelu. And Ramoshoso, that's the servant that said, Etein Zelefnei Meish, how could I use this to feed 100 people? So obviously this was meant to feed 100 people. Says the Gemara, do you think that all 22 loaves together was meant to feed 100 people? That can be, because you wouldn't have a situation in which in a famine that people would eat that much. So it must be that each loaf was meant to feed 100 people, so that there was 2,200 loaves altogether in those times. Now the Gemara speaks about having mentioned how many people are left behind to be fed after they leave. Those are the people that are dependent upon the Magachir. The Gemara brings a number of statements about people, how they used to leave the yeshiva. So the Gemara says when the Rabbanan would leave the yeshiva of Rav, there would be 1,100 people left behind. When they would leave Rav Huna, there would be 800 people left behind. Now the Gemara Agav mentions a number of things about the shir of Rav Huna. The Gemara says Rav Huna would have 13 interpreters, 13 people who would say over his shir to the Rabbin. That's how large a crowd he had. And when they would get up to leave, they would brush the dust off their cloaks. It would be so much of them, so much of the cloaks, and so much of the dust, it would raise a cloud of the dust which would cover the sun. And all the way in Eretz Yisrael, they would say, we see that the shir of Rav Huna is ended, and the Talmidim have got up to leave. Now, further about people leaving a shir, when the Rabbanan would leave Rabbah and Rav Yosef, they left behind 400 people who were dependent, and they called themselves the orphans. And when they left the shir of Abaye, some say it was Rav Papa, and some say it was Rav Ashi, they left behind 200, and they called themselves the orphans of the orphans. Now the Gemara refers back to what we said earlier, that the judges who decide how much a theft is worth and how much needs to be paid, they got their own salary from the Trumas Halishka, the coins that were set aside for public needs in the Beis HaMikdash. Now the Gemara lists a number of other people who are paid by the Trumas Halishka. So the Gemara quotes Rav Yitzchak bar Rav Difnei Rav Ami, who says that the people who check Mumin in Yerushalayim, they got paid from the Trumas Halishka. Rav Yehuda, the name of Shmuel, says Lo Talmid Chachamim who taught Shechita to the Kohanim, they were on the list. Rav Gidol, the name of Rav, said Talmid Chachamim that taught Kemitza to Kohanim, they got paid. Rabba Bar Chana, Rav Yechonon said those who would fix the svarim of people who lived in Yerushalayim, they got paid from Trumas Halishka. Rav Nachman, the name of Rav, said that the women who wove the parochas for the Beis HaMikdash, they got paid from the Trumas Halishka. And he himself said that I say that they got paid from the Bedek Habayis funds, because the curtains are considered to be walls, and the walls, the fixing of the walls of the Beis HaMikdash, that had a separate fund, and anything which was given to the Beis HaMikdash for Bedek Habayis, that went to that. So where's the kash on that? We have a brisa that says that Beis Garmu, who used to make the lechem hapanim, and Beis of Tinis, who would make the kitores, as well as the women who wove, they all got paid from the Trumas Halishka. So you see that it wasn't from the Bedek Habayis, it's from the Trumas Halishka. So the answer says no, there's different parochos. That's referring to the ones that were hovering, that were covering the doorways those there are not considered walls. Those were paid from the Trumas Halishka. I'm talking about the ones that were forming a wall. The Gemara quotes Rabbi Zeir, name of Rav, who says there were 13 parochos, 13 curtains in the Beis Hamikdash. And in the second Beis Hamikdash, that is, there were 7 for the 7 gateways, 1 for the entrance to the Heichal, 1 to the entrance to the Ulam, 2 in the Kodesh HaKodashim, and 2 above them in the attic of the Kodesh HaKodashim. Now we go to Brisa that says that women used to raise their children for the Parah Aduma, that is, they would stay in a special place where there was no chashash of Tumah, because there was above the bedrock itself, there couldn't be a grave there, in order to keep them tahar, so that they could bring the water for the Parah Aduma without any concern of Truma. So they had to be supported, so because they couldn't work, because they kept their kids in this isolated environment. So they were paid by the Trumas Halishka. Abba Shaul says that the women of Yerushalayim would feed them on their own, and they didn't need to be paid from the Trumas Halishka. The Gemara now moves into a number of other items in the Beis Hamikdash. The Gemara wants to know from which fund were they drawn. As we've discussed, we have 2 funds we've been discussing so far. The fund which is the Trumas Halishka, that is the coins that were drawn from the collection of Machatzis HaShekel. Machatzis HaShekel was given every year on the beginning of the month of Adar, and it was used to pay for Karbanos, Tzibor, and other public needs pertaining to the Karbanos and the Avoda in the Beis HaMikdash. Besides for that, there was another fund called the Bedek Habayis fund, which was for the construction of everything that was part of the physical creation, the stones, the walls of the Beis HaMikdash itself. Another Gemara asks, what about the Klei Shares? That is the tools that they used to use to be mark of the Karbanos. So were those considered to be something which was serving the physical Beis HaMikdash, such as serving the Mizbeach, which was made out of stones, and is therefore considered to be part of the structure of the Beis HaMikdash? So the Klei Shares are something you use to help the Mizbeach. It's to help the Karbanos be brought on the Mizbeach, and therefore it should be brought from the Bedek Habayis fund. Or do you say that the Klei Shares were used to help bring the carbon, and therefore it's something which is meant to serve the carbon, and it's part of the carbon funds and should be drawn from Trumas Halishka? So Gemara says this question was asked to Rav Huna, and he answered that it's Klei Shares, that the Klei Shares are drawn from the Trumas Halishka funds, from the money which is drawn from the Machatzis HaShekel, the public funds for public Karbanos. Now, the Gemara is going to say later that there are Tanaim who agree with this, but for now the Gemara is a kasha. The Gemara says that they asked, there's a pasuk in Sefer Divrei Hayamim describing when the king Yehoash remodeled the Beis Hamikdash and he repaired it. They collected a lot of money and they set it aside for the repairs. So that was Bedek Habayis money, and the leftover money was used to buy Klei Shares. So you see that Bedek Habayis money is used for Klei Shares. So the Gemara quotes the pasuk. It says and when they finished doing all the work, they brought the extra money before the king, the Yehoyada, and the Kohen Hagadol, as Shara Kesef, the rest, the leftover money. They asked, so you see that they use it to make the Klei Shares, and the Klei Shares are therefore made from Bedek Habayis funds. So this question was asked to Rav Huna. It's a kash on him who said that the Klei Shares should be made from Trumas Halishka funds. So Rav Huna answered, he said, the one who taught you how to read, the one who taught you Ksuvim, this is Divrei Hayamim, it's Ksuvim, did not teach you Navi. In Navi it's clear that you have to make it only from Trumas Halishka funds. What does it say there? So say from Malachim, it says, Ach lo yaseh Beis Hashem sipos kesef mezarmos mezrakos chatzursos kol kli zavo kli chesed mina kesef ha'amuva Beis Hashem. You cannot use the money, the Machatzis HaShekel, to make the kelim. So it's clear in Nevi'im that it's not. So Gemara says, okay, you have a good point, but it's a contradiction between Ksuvim and Nevi'im. So what do we do with that? So Gemara says it's not a kasha. One is talking about the actual funds themselves that were collected. The others are talking about the leftover funds. So the actual funds that were collected for Bedek Habayis, that can be used only for Bedek Habayis, not for Klei Shares. Whatever's left over, you're allowed to use for Klei Shares. So Gemara asks, why should leftover be different? Leftover was still collected for the purpose of Bedek Habayis. Shouldn't be able to use it for something else. So Gemara says, no, the Beis Din always made a Tanai that whatever is needed for the Bedek Habayis can be used for a Bedek Habayis. Anything left over could be used for Klei Shares afterwards. Now, the Gemara quotes a brisa where the Tanna de Rabbi Shmuel says that the Klei Shares, just like Rav Huna said, are indeed made from the Trumas Halishka, from the Machatzis HaShekel funds, from whatever was taken out of the collection boxes of the machatzis hashekel. What's his makar? So he quotes the same pasuk where it says, "As sha'ara kesef," the leftover money was used for Trumas Halishka, and he says, "What is this money?" When it says sha'ara kesef, that was talking about Trumas Halishka funds. That was actually talking about the machatzis hashekel funds, even though it was in the pasuk talking about the kabayis funds. Where do you see that? Because it says sha'ara kesef, leftover. The leftover, what money has leftovers? So leftover is a term that you find discussing machatzis hashekel. Because machatzis hashekel, what they would do is that they would fill up the boxes with the coins that were brought, and then they would take a basket, scoop out basketfuls of money, and whatever was left in the boxes was called shi'orei halishka, what's left over in the box. Now that money could be drawn from again. However, if Nisan came around and they brought another collection, whatever was left was now leftover funds, was called Shi'orei Halishka, and they couldn't use it for the Karbanos Tzibur anymore. They would have to use it for separate things, and the Gemara discusses in Masech Shkolim what they were used for. And we'll see a brisa soon that discusses what some of those funds were used for. So the money that has leftovers, that's Machatzis HaShekel money. That is not but the kabayis money. It's not, the term leftover doesn't refer. So here when we say sha'ar kesef, we're talking about machatzis hashekel money, and that's what we're referring to when the klei sharis here are made. So the Gemara says, if that's true, so then the money you should use for machatzis hashekel shouldn't be the actual basketfuls that you draw from the kupa, that you draw from the collection boxes. The money that you're using should be the leftovers. You're saying here that the leftover is what is it's referring to the sha'ar kesef, the leftover funds. So the leftover funds, that's what you used. So why are we saying that it's the money that actually came up in the baskets? It should be the money that's left behind. So Gemara says no, because it refers to it as ha kesef with an extra hay. Whenever you have an extra hay, that means the first money, the money that is first drawn. You see that from the statement of Rava where it says ha oila in a different pasuk, which is talking about carbon tamid. It calls it ha'ila, the carbon ayla. That teaches me that this is the first carbon for the day. You can't bring anything before the carbon tamid. It has to be first. So the extra hay says it has to be the one. It means the first one. So the next one, it says the hay on ha'kesef, the money. It has to also be the first one. And therefore, the money we're talking about here is the money which is drawn first, not the money that's left over afterwards. The Gemara now quotes two lengthy brises, which include a number of funds in the Beis Hamikdash, up to 7 different funds, and what functions they were used for, a large number of different funds, and a large number of opinions, 4 or 5 different opinions in what they were used for. The Gemara's point is that the first brisa says that the klei sharis are made from the leftover of the nisachim. We'll explain what that is. And the Gemara asks that how could we say that they were made from the koche bedek habayis or from the Trumas Halishka, if you have a brisa here that clearly says that it's made from the leftover of the Nesach. And the Gemara says that's Rabbi Kivi's opinion, but Rabbi Chilin Kahanim argues, and he says that it was the Trumas Halishka, and therefore our brisa is going according to Rabbi Chilin Kahanim. But now let's see the brises at length. That's the Gemara's point in bringing them in, and the Gemara brings a second brisa to show that it's really Machlokes Tanoim. So now let's see the 7 different funds that they were, and let's discuss the number of opinions that there are. So fund number 1, we've already discussed Trumas Halishka. That is the large collection of Machatzis HaShekel was put in boxes in the Azara, and then they would take out a basket full 3 times a year. They would fill up a basket with these coins and use them to buy karbanos and use them for other expenses. So that basket full is called Trumas Halishka. Now, Moiser HaTruma is the leftover. That is what's left over in those baskets. If you have a basket full and they didn't use up all the money in the basket, and Rosh Chodesh Nisan arrives, you can't use it. And you can't use that money anymore. That's called Moiser Halishka, the leftover. That's called Moiser HaTruma, the leftover of what was taken. Now, Shi'orei Halishka, that is what is left in the box after they scoop out the basket full before Rosh Chodesh Nisan arrives. Moiser Shi'orei Halishka, that's what's left in the box after they scoop out the basket full after Rosh Chodesh Nisan arrives. So you can't use it anymore for karbanos because you have to use the new shekels that come in now after Rosh Chodesh Adar, after the 15th of Adar. Now, that's the first 4 types. Then we have the 5th one is Kachei Bedek Habayis, that is anything which is brought to the Beis HaMikdash, which can't be brought as a carbon. It was given and donated for the purposes of the Beis HaMikdash. That's used, as we saw before, to fix up the walls, and the Gemara will bring that in soon in the Brisa. Then there's Moiser Nesachim. Moiser Nesachim is left over from the things that people brought, flour and oil, as a nisuch. So Gemara says, what is Moiser Nesachim? That's a Gemara not here. It's a Gemara different Masechta. And there's machlokes between Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Yossi against Rabbi Yechlan. Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Yossi say that this means when people would bring, let's say, flour, they would bring a full measure, they would bring a heaping amount. But then when the Beis Hamikdash would, the when the flour was sold to the people who had to bring karbanos, it was sold in a flat and smoothed out amount. So there was extra flour, therefore, that was left over. What was brought in was not all used. So that extra flour was sold, and that extra fund was called the Moiser Nesachim, the leftover of the Nesachim. That is the opinion of Reb Chiya and Reb Yosi. Reb Yochanan says a similar thing. When people would pledge to give a certain amount to the Beis Hamikdash Nesachim fund, they would pledge a certain coinage amount. Let's say they would say 5 selah worth. Then if the price went up or down, and therefore the amount that they had to bring changed for the same coinage, less or more, then the extra would go to the Beis Hamikdash. If they went down, they had to bring more to equal how much they said, and if it went up, they had to bring more to equal the new price. So either way, the Beis Hamikdash would gain the extra, and that extra money, that was Nesachim. That was called Moiser Nesach. Okay, so those are the two opinions in that. Now, the seventh type of fund is called Moiser Peiros. That is where you would take some of the funds that Hektish had, you would buy fruits, sell it at a profit, and the amount equal to what Hektish spent on it would go to the Moiser Nesachim fund. That's where they had that for. And then the extra that would be used for something else, whatever the profit that they made, that would be called Moiser Peiros. Now, the machlokes is whether Moiser Peiros exists. The machlokes is between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Chanina against Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel held that they would do this. And it was used, the extra funds, we'll see what it was used for. Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Chanina held that this was not done. You could not sell Hektish materials and try to make a profit with it. We did not do business with Hektish funds, even for the benefit of Hektish. And the reason is because Ein Aniyas B'Makam Ashiros, that is a pauperish thing to do. We don't do pauper things in the Beis Hamikdash. They also have the same discussion about selling food which is left over in the food pantry that's supposed to be feeding the poor. Can you sell that and try to make profit for the sake of the food pantry? And again, Rabbi Akiva says you're not allowed to do that because there may be poor people will show up after you've sold it and you won't have any food on hand. You always have to keep that food on hand, even though you could theoretically make a profit off it for the benefit of the poor. You can't do that. Now, what are all these 7 funds used for? So throughout these 2 brises, we see as follows. Trumas Halishka, the first brisa says that is again the money that is drawn from the boxes of Machzis HaShekel. That's used to buy the Ketores and the Karbanos Tzibor. And of course, we saw earlier in the daf it was used to pay the salaries of a number of people who worked in the public interest. Now, the leftover in the Truma basket called Moiser HaTruma after Chodesh Nisan, so that's a machlokes. There are 4 opinions. According to the Chachamim, it's used to plate the insides of the Kodesh Kodashim with gold. According to Rabbi Chanina Skana Kahanim, it's used for Kli Shares. That is the opinion that we saw before. Rabbi Akiva holds that it's used to buy karbanos for the mizbeach when there's nothing there. You don't want the mizbeach to be empty, so they would buy special karbanos olah to bring when there was nothing else going on. According to Rabbi Yishmael, Hektish would use it to sell, and then they would use it to buy fruits, and they would sell the fruits at a profit, and the extra. The main part was used for klishares, and the rest was used for keitzim mizbeach when there was nothing going on the mizbeach was empty. So those are the 4 opinions as far as Moser Truma. Then there's shiare halishka. Shiare halishka, as we said, is what is left over in the boxes after they took the basket full. So that was used for anything outside of the wall of the Azar, any parts of the Beis Hamikdash Harabayis outside of the Azar itself. So the Ezras Nashim, the Chel, the wall of the city, the towers, all the needs of the city of Yerushalayim was all paid with shiare halishka. Now, leftovers of shiare halishka, that's what's left in the box after Rosh Chodesh Nisan. According to Rabbi Shmuel, they would buy oil and wine and flour and sell it, and Hektish would make a profit off it. Kache, now the 5th fund is Kache Bedek Habayis. That was used for the Mizbeach HaOlah, for the physical structure of the Mizbeach, and for the Lishkos, the Azaros, the rest of the walls of everything inside the Azaros themselves. The 6th fund is the extra Nisachim. According to Rabbi Akiva, that's used to service the gold Mizbeach, the Mizbeach HaKetores, because that is a kli that is not like the outer mizbeach, that is not connected to the ground, and it is also used to buy levona and is used to buy kli sharis. This is what the Gemara asked the kasha from. The Gemara answered that this is machlokes tanaim. Now, Rabbi Chanina Skana Kahanim says this is used for keitzim mizbeach. And the last one is the extra from the sale of the fruits. According to Rabbi Shmuel, it's used, as we said, for the Mizbeach when it's empty, and Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Chanina held that this fund did not exist because you could not do profit with hekdesh.